You've probably seen it without realizing what you were looking at. A pop star walks out on stage with a trident in her hand, dressed in seafoam green and gold. The internet calls it an aesthetic choice. The captions call it a vibe. But if you know what you're looking at, that's Yemoja, Mother of Waters, one of the principal Orishas of the Yoruba tradition. Another singer posts a photo wearing yellow surrounded by honey and peacock feathers. That's Ocean, goddess of rivers and fertility. Beyonce, Rihanna, Princess Nokia, Solange. The references are everywhere now, sometimes ornamental, sometimes ceremonial, sometimes, and this part should stop us, explicitly devotional. And here's the framing that comes with it. Always the same framing. This is my heritage. This is what my ancestors knew before colonization. This is what was taken from us. This is what I'm reclaiming. I want to take that seriously, I genuinely do. Because here's the thing, they're not entirely wrong. There is something there. There is a heritage. There is a memory. The Orishas aren't an invention. The traditions surrounding them are old. They survived slave ships. They survived plantation Christianity. They survived everything that was thrown at them. And they're alive right now, today, on stage and in songs and in shrines from Lagos to Bahia to Brooklyn. But when someone says, this is older than your colonial Christianity, this is what we knew before they came, I don't want to dismiss that. I want to do something else. I want to ask a different question. What if your heritage is real, but it's older than you think? What if the memory goes back further than the Orishas? What if every culture on earth was remembering the same thing? And only one tradition tells you the whole story, because here's what I've been sitting on. There's a pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Orishas, Apkallu, Zeus, Noah, 4 names, 4 traditions, 4 cultures that never met each other. Mesopotamia, West Africa, Greece, the Hebrew scriptures separated by oceans and centuries, and languages that share no root. And they're all telling the same story. Divine beings descended, knowledge was given, humanity became corrupt, the waters came, something was reset. Every single one of them. So either we've got the most extraordinary coincidence in the history of human civilization, 4 cultures independently inventing the same theological structure, or something actually happened. And every culture remembered it through the lens of their own gods. Now, I know some of you are already thinking about alternative explanations. Diffusion, shared archetypes in the human mind. Coincidence? I'll come back to those as we walk through, but for now, hold the question open, walk with me, see what you see, because here's the pattern I want you to watch for. And once you've seen it, you won't be able to unsee it. Every descent so far makes the problem worse. Every time divine beings cross the boundary into the human realm, in every tradition we're about to look at, humanity ends up worse. Not wiser, not freer, not closer to the divine. Worse, more corrupt, more violent, more disconnected. The descent is the problem, not the solution. Hold on to that phrase. Hold on to that phrase in your head as we walk. Every descent makes it worse. What we're going to walk through today, the full pattern. We're going to walk through the full pattern. Mesopotamia first, then West Africa, then Greece, then a quick look at the Maya, because the parallel there is so tight, you'll think I'm making it up. And then we're going to go to Genesis 6, and you're going to see something that you're going to see that scripture isn't borrowing from any of these. Scripture is reporting. But here's the part that matters most, because this isn't just about pattern recognition. Every one of these traditions identified the same problem, every one of them, and every one of them attempted a solution, and only one of them has an answer that ends the cycle. The rest would leave you in a loop. Reset, corrupt, cleanse, repeat, manage the gap, never close it. Only one tradition tells you the gap was closed once and for all. by someone who didn't grasp at being God because he already was, who didn't send another flood because he came himself. One descent that didn't make things worse, one descent that made things new. So let's walk it. Let's start with Mesopotamia. You won't find them in Bibles. You won't find them in sermons. But the Mesopotamians knew about them. The Sumerians knew about them. The Babylonians knew about them, and they wrote them down. 7 beings sent from the heavens before the flood, the Apkallu. The word itself means sage or wise one, but that doesn't capture what they were. The text described them as part divine and part human, sent down by Enki, the god of wisdom and waters, to teach mankind the foundations of civilization: writing, mathematics, architecture, metallurgy, magic, divination, and the arts of the priesthood. They appear in ancient Mesopotamian art as winged figures, often with a body of a fish, sometimes with a head of an eagle, towering, carrying a small bucket and what looks like a pine cone, performing some kind of ritual over a much smaller human figure. 7 of them, by name, listed in Assyrian incantation series called Bet-Niseri, if I pronounce that right, the protected house, dating back to the early 1st millennium BC. Listed again in the Uruk list of kings and sages, dated to 165 BC, listed again by the Babylonian priest Orishas around 290 BC. The 3 independent ancient sources, all agreeing on the number, all agreeing on the basic sequence, each one credited with bringing a different category of forbidden knowledge to a different antediluvian king. And then the flood came. After the flood, according to the text, there were no more Apkallu. The age of the wise ones ended. What followed was a different age, an age of men, an age of compromised wisdom, and an age of partial recovery. Now, stop and feel the weight for a second. A culture in ancient Iraq 5,000 years ago, with no contact with Israel because Israel didn't exist yet, writing about 7 divine beings who came down before a worldwide flood, taught humanity forbidden knowledge, and were never seen again afterwards. And then you open up Genesis 6. And what does Genesis 6 tell you? The sons of God came down, they mixed with the daughters of men, they produced offspring, and the result was so corrupt, so violently corrupt, that God sent a flood, after which the world was different, after which the wisdom that had been let loose had been held back, and after which there was finally a new beginning. The Mesopotamians weren't reading Genesis. Genesis hadn't been written yet, but they were remembering the same event through the lens of their own God, with their own counting systems and their own categories. This isn't borrowing, this is parallel testimony. And it's not just a descent, it's not just the knowledge, it's the sequence. Descent, knowledge, corruption, flood, reset. The same 5-beat structure that runs through Genesis 6 through to 9 and runs through the Mesopotamian sources independently. But here's what's worth noticing before we move on. The Apkallu didn't come to redeem anyone. They came to transmit. They handed humanity tools and techniques and arts. And then humanity used those tools to become corrupt, to become so corrupt the gods couldn't stand it anymore. The flood wasn't an accident, it was a response. The knowledge was the problem. The knowledge they brought down without giving humanity the wisdom to handle it was the problem. Did you catch that? The descent made it worse. 7 divine beings crossed the boundary, carrying tools of civilization, and humanity used those tools to destroy itself so thoroughly that the gods had to wipe the slate clean. That's descent number 1. Make sure you're holding the pattern. Before we leave Mesopotamia, there's one more thing you need to see, because the Mesopotamians didn't just preserve the story of the Apkallu, they preserved the flood itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest pieces of literature on earth. It predates the writing of Genesis. The standard Babylonian version was first translated by George Smith of the British Museum in 72. And when he read the flood tablet to the Society of Biblical Archaeology in London, it caused a sensation across Europe. People couldn't believe what they were reading. A man named Utnapishtim, warned by God of an impending worldwide flood, instructed to build a vessel, a great boat with specific dimensions, sealed with pitch. He loads it with animals and with his family, with craftsmen and their knowledge. The rains come, the waters rise, everything outside the vessel was destroyed. The waters subside, he releases a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. The raven doesn't return, the ground is dry. He lands on a mountain, he offers sacrifice, the gods smell an offering, a dove, a swallow, a raven, a mountain, a vessel sealed with pitch, an offering when the waters recede. You've read this before, okay? You've read this in Genesis chapter 8. Now, here's a question the skeptics love to ask. Did Israel just borrow from Babylon? Was Noah just a Hebrew Utnapishtim? Here's my answer. The question is backwards. The better question is, why does Babylon have this account at all? Because Babylon wasn't there. Babylon came centuries after the flood. Babylon had a memory, a transmission, a story passed down through generations of people who trace their lineage back to the survivors. The Babylonians remembered the flood because their ancestors were there, not as participants, not as observers, but as the descendants of the people who climbed off the ark into a new world. Genesis isn't borrowing from the Epic of Gilgamesh. They're both reporting the same event. The Babylonian account turns the flood into a petty squabble between gods. Enlil wants humanity destroyed because they're too noisy. Enki warns Utnapishtim in secret and essentially tricks the other gods. It's politics. It's chaos. There's no moral framework, no covenant, no promises on the other side. Genesis turns the same event into something else entirely. A holy God making a moral judgment on a corrupted world and preserving a line, a seed, a future through one man and his household. Same event, two completely different interpretations, and only one of them has a God who makes promises and keeps them. Hold that thought, because we're about to see the same pattern in West Africa. West Africa, Yoruba land, modern-day Nigeria, Benin, Togo, the traditional religions known as, if I can pronounce this right, Ilise, or in English, the worship of the Orishas. Here's what Yoruba cosmology teaches. At the top, Olodumare, the supreme being, the source of all creation, distant, immanent in the universe, but not directly engaged with the affairs of humanity. Olodumare delegates. Below Olodumare, the Iranumole, I know I'm butchering the names, the original entities sent by Olodumare to complete given tasks, they serve as liaisons between Urun, the invisible realm, and Ei, the physical realm. They cross the boundary, they descend, that's what they do. The Iranumole are the highest ranking divinities, the principal Orishas, and there are 7 of them. Now stop, just hold that. 7 principal divine beings sent by the supreme being crossing from the invisible realm to the physical realm to bring something to humanity. 7 Apkallu in Mesopotamia, 7 principal Orishas in Yoruba land, 2 cultures with no contact. No shared language, no overlapping mythological tradition, and they're both organizing their highest divine order around the same number, doing the same work. That's not a coincidence. Anyone should be comfortable with that. But it gets sharper. What did the Orishas bring? They brought knowledge, specific, gated, dangerous knowledge. Arumile, the Orisha of wisdom and divinations, gave humans the Ifa system, 16 sacred palm nuts, 256 Odu, or sacred vessels, a complete system of accessing hidden knowledge through ritual divination. Arumile is described as one of the only Orishas who can travel unimpeded between the realm of gods and the realm of humans, carrying messages between them. Or saying, the Orisha of herbal medicine guards what the sources describe as exclusive and jealously guarded knowledge of which plants heal and which harm and which open doorways to spiritual realms. Nothing in Yoruba spirituality can be done without his permission. Eshu, the trickster, the messenger, stands at the boundary between the worlds. He governs what passes between them. Knowledge, crossing the boundary, brought down by divine beings, gated, dangerous, just like Genesis 6. But here's where the Yoruba tradition becomes the most important parallel we've looked at, because Yoruba tradition tells you what happened next. According to accounts preserved in the Yoruba oral tradition, collected and documented by scholars like Harold Corlander in Tales of Yoruba Gods and Heroes, and by Wande Abimbola and Bolaji Idowu in their foundational work on Yoruba religion, there's a story of beings called Eniyan, the first humans. They lived in harmony with Ea, the planet. But as time passed, the Eniyan became corrupt. They abused their esoteric and spiritual powers to destroy each other. Now, I want to be careful here. Yoruba tradition is primarily oral, and the different lineages preserve different versions, but this version of accounts is widely attested in the scholarship, and it uses a phrase that should stop you. They abused their esoteric and spiritual powers to destroy each other. That's a Genesis 6 sentence. That's a line you'd write if you were looking at what the Bene Elohim left behind. The knowledge that was given was used as a weapon. The corruption was so deep it required a response. And what was the response? Olokun, goddess of the sea in Yoruba cosmology, sent a great flood to cleanse the earth of its impurities. A flood to cleanse the earth from corruption that came from divine beings crossing the boundary and giving humanity knowledge it couldn't handle. That sentence could be lifted out of Yoruba tradition or out of Genesis 6. And you wouldn't be able to tell which one it came from. And the Yoruba tradition, it doesn't just preserve one flood, there are multiple. Yemoja's waters broke in another account, causing a great flood. Ocean sent rain that nearly drowned the world when she was angered. Sopona is one of the Orishas. Is described in the tradition as an enforcer of moral order, sending plagues when communities violate sacred laws, divine judgment by water for human corruption brought about by the misuse of knowledge given by divine beings who cross the boundary. Same pattern, same sequence, different names on the characters. And notice the descent made it worse here too. The Orishas came down bearing knowledge. The humans used that knowledge to destroy themselves. Just like in Mesopotamia, descent, knowledge, corruption, flood. That's descent number 2. The pattern is holding. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that Yoruba had a copy of Genesis. I'm saying the opposite. They didn't need one. They were remembering the same event independently. And I want to honor something. The Yoruba theology recognizes what happened. It identifies the problem accurately. Divine beings descended, knowledge was given, humans corrupted that knowledge. The waters came as a judgment, the earth was cleansed. That's not a small thing. That's a culture preserving for thousands of years across the Middle Passage through colonization into the present day, a memory of something that actually happened. But here's where the parallel stops. Because Yoruba theology can't tell you what happened. It can tell you about the divine beings. It can tell you about the corruption. It can tell you about the cleansing. What it can't tell you is how to fix it permanently. The Yoruba solution to the human problem is reconnection. You reconnect with your destiny. You reconnect to your destiny, to one another, to sacred power, through divination, through sacrifice, through ritual possession. The Orishas serve as intermediaries. You manage the gap between you and the Olodumare by going through them. But notice what's missing from that. There's no mechanism to close the gap. There's no day of judgment that resolves the corruption once and for all. There's no permanent answer. The Yoruba do not believe in a specific day of judgment for the dead. The cycle continues, reincarnation through the family line. Un, un, Atunwa, the soul returns, the work continues. The reconnection has to be performed again and again and again. The flood cleansed the earth, but the corruption came back. So the rituals continue. So the divination continues. The sacrifice continues. The gap is not managed, not closed. And that's the limit of every tradition we're going to be looking at. The problem is identified. The solution is partial. The cycle continues. Now let's go to Greece. Because Greece tells the same story, but it tells it through a different number and a different lens. And you need to see it before we can get to see what makes Genesis different. Greek mythology doesn't have 7 foundational divine beings. It has 12. 12 elder titans born of Gaia and Uranus, the original divine order. They ruled the cosmos before the rise of the Olympians, and after them, 12 Olympian gods ruling from Mount Olympus. Greece moves in 12s, and that's its signature. The Apkallu and the Orishas come in 7s. Greece comes in 12s. The numbers differ, but notice there's still a number. There's still a defined ordered set of divine beings governing the cosmos. The structure is universal, only the count varies. And the Greek story has the same beats. The Titans are overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians in a cosmic war. The defeated Titans are cast into Tartarus, a pit of darkness beneath the earth, held there just like Jude says about the angels who left their proper domain. The angels who did not keep their first estate but left their own habitations, he has reserved under everlasting change under darkness. Held in chains under darkness until judgment. Now stop here, because this is a moment I need you to feel. Peter is writing to first century Jewish Christians. He's writing in Greek, the common language of the Roman world. And when he wants to describe where the divine rebels are being held, the Beni Elohim of Genesis 6, the angels who left their proper domain, he reaches for a Greek word, Tartarus. Not Sheol, not Gehenna, not any Hebrew word for the underworld. He uses the Greek word. The word every Greek-speaking person in his audience would immediately recognize. The prison at the bottom of Greek cosmology, where the defeated Titans were sent after their overthrow. Why does he do that? Because the Greeks were already described in the right place. They had preserved, imperfectly through their own theological lens, through their own mythology, a memory of where divine rebels were imprisoned. And Peter says, yes, that place, that's where they are. He's not endorsing Greek mythology. He's doing something more interesting. He's saying the thing in your culture, the thing that your culture dimly remembered, the prison you named Tartarus, it's real. And the beings your ancestors called Titans, the ones who overstepped and were cast down, they are there right now waiting for judgment. The Greeks were remembering something real, and Peter confirms it without endorsing the mythology surrounding it. That's how the biblical writers handle these traditions consistently. Not dismissal, not wholesale adoption, calibration. Here's what you got right, here's what you got wrong, here's the full picture. And then came the Greek demigods, Heracles, Achilles, Perseus, children of gods and mortals, famous worshipped cultic figures across the Mediterranean for thousands of years. The Nephilim of Genesis 6 are described in exactly those same terms. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Hebrew word for renown there, Shem, means name. Famous, celebrated, worshipped. Greek demigods. Hebrew Nephilim, same category, same product, same boundary crossed in the same way. And then, because of course Greek mythology has a flood, Deucalion's, if I can pronounce that correctly, Deucalion's flood, Zeus, angered by human corruption, sends a great deluge to destroy mankind. Deucalion and his wife Pirha, can't pronounce these Greek words, apologize, survive in a chest, They land on a mountain, they repopulate the earth. Noah and his wife. An ark, Mount Ararat, repopulating the earth. Same story, different names, different gods, same structure. And notice, here too, the descent made it worse. The Titans descended, produced demigods. The world filled with violence. Zeus sent a flood. Descent number 3. Same pattern, holding perfectly. Are you seeing it yet? Now I'm going to make a brief stop here because there's one more parallel worth naming before we get to Genesis, and then we'll move on. Mesoamerica, the Maya, 5,000 miles away. 5,000 miles away from Mesopotamia, with absolutely no possibility of contact, have a sacred tradition called Popol Vuh, recorded in Latin script around 1554, from oral tradition far older. The standard modern translation is by Dennis Tedlock, who worked directly with a Kishi Maya daykeeper to produce it. And the Popol Vuh describes the gods making humans multiple times. First from mud, the mud humans dissolve, useless. Then from wood, the wooden humans populate the earth, but they're emotionless. They forget their makers, they don't worship, they don't acknowledge the divine, they're arrogant. So the gods sent a flood. The text is explicit. Huracan, the heart of heaven, caused the waters to swell, and a great flood came upon the wooden people. The animals they ate turned against them. Their tools rebelled. Those who survive are turned into monkeys. Wooden humans destroyed by a flood because they forgot their makers and became arrogant. That's Genesis 6 frame. Different cast, same play. The Aztecs go further. They have 5 world ages, 5 sons. The 4th son ended in a great flood. Coxcox and his wife survived in a hollow vessel. Sound familiar? They believed each age ended because humanity became wicked or fouled in spiritual obligation. Each age requires a reset. The current 5th son, they believe, would end in earthquakes. But notice, cycles always cycles. 5 world ages and counting. Aztecs, Maya, Greeks, Yoruba, Mesopotamian, different numbers, different gods, different mechanisms, same structure, same memory, same problem. And in every single case, the same gap. The problem is named, a response is given, the reset comes, and then eventually the cycle part repeats. That's the wall every one of these traditions runs into. None of them can stop the loop. Now, quick aside on the alternative explanations I said I'll come back to. Some will say this is diffusion. One culture had the story, pass it to another, pass it to another. The problem is the geography. West Africa and Mesoamerica had no contact with Mesopotamia, none. The stories exist in cultures with no possible transmission route. Diffusion doesn't work on all 4. Others will say, oh, it's Jungian archetypes, deep patterns in the collective unconscious that humans independently generate. But that explanation is so broad, it explains nothing. It's basically saying humans are wired to invent this specific story about divine beings, knowledge, corruption, and floods in this specific sequence across every continent. If that's the case, you've got to ask why, and what are we wired to remember? And coincidence. I'll just say this. 4 cultures, same sequence, same beats. That's not coincidence, that's testimony. So the pattern holds 3 descents, 3 floods, and 1 more ahead, the one that reports what the others were remembering. Now we go to Genesis, because Genesis tells the same story, but for the first time in the history of human civilization, the story has somewhere to go. Open Genesis 6. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Sons of God, Beni Elohim in Hebrew. Now, I went into this in detail in the Nephilim video. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it after this. But here's a short version. Beni Elohim appears 5 other times in the Old Testament. Job 1, Job 2, Job 38, Job 38, Psalm 29, Psalm 89. Every single time it refers to heavenly beings, divine beings, not men. Jude confirms it. The angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. Peter confirms it. Spirits who sinned, held in chains, waiting for judgment. The Beni Elohim crossed the boundary. They left their first estate. They took human women, and the result was Nephilim. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Heroes of old, men of renown. The Greek demigods, the Apkallu, kings. The wooden people of Popol Vuh. Well, no, not those. Those got destroyed early. But the heroes, the ones the cultures remembered, worshipped, built temples to, that category, that's what Genesis is naming. And then comes the verdict. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Every inclination, only evil all the time. That's not a temper tantrum, that's a diagnosis. The human line had been so compromised by what the Beni Elohim had brought into it that the corruption is total. There is no recovery from inside the system. So God sends the flood. And there it is, descent number 4. The Beni Elohim crossed the boundary. Corruption, flood. The descent made it worse. Exactly the same pattern Mesopotamia remembered. Exactly the same pattern Yoruba preserved. Exactly the same pattern the Greeks told with different names. Exactly the same pattern the Maya recorded with the Popol Vuh. 4 cultures, same sequence, same beats. The report from scripture matches the memories from everywhere. But here's the part. Here's where Genesis parts companies with every other tradition. Because this is the part every other tradition gets almost right and then stops. Mesopotamia knew the flood happened. They got that right. They didn't know what came after. Yoruba knew the flood was a cleansing. They got that right. They didn't know how to make the cleansing permanent. Greek knew there were divine rebels held in Tartarus. They got that right. They had no way to redeem those who the rebels had broken. The Maya knew that human corruption requires a divine response. They got that right. They had to do it again and again and again and again. The Aztecs knew the world ends and resets. They got that right. They knew it would end again. Every culture got the report mostly right. None of them got the resolution. But Genesis 6 isn't operating in a vacuum. It sits inside a story that started in Genesis 3. And it's heading somewhere none of the other traditions could imagine. Because in Genesis 3, long before Beni Elohim, long before the Nephilim, long before the flood, God said something to the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. The seed of the woman. That promise was made in the garden. It was made before the corruption. It was made before the flood was needed. God knew what was coming, and he put a marker down. There will be a seed that solves this. There will be one who comes through the woman and crushes the source of the corruption itself. The flood was a reset. The flood preserved the line. The flood kept the promise alive, but the flood wasn't actually even that full answer. The flood was a holding action, a surgical intervention to keep the seed line viable until the seed could come. And that's the thing every other tradition was missing. Every other tradition treated the flood as the answer. The Mesopotamians treated it as an act of divine annoyance, almost capricious. The Yoruba treated it as a cleansing that has to be repeated through ritual. The Maya treated it as one of those several attempts to get humanity right. The Aztecs treated it as part of an ongoing cycle. Genesis treats the flood as a means to an end, a reset that preserves the line so the seed can come. And the seed is heading somewhere very specific. Let me show you. Here's the thing about resets. They worked for a while. The flood happened, the corruption was cleansed, and Nephilim were gone. Noah and his family stepped off the ark into a new world. And then, what? Open Genesis 9. Read what happens. Noah plants a vineyard. Noah gets drunk. Noah lies naked in his tent. His son Ham does something. The text is careful, but whatever it was bad enough to bring a curse in his line. We don't know what it was. And then Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. Humanity unified and unified in rebellion. Building a tower to the heavens, God scatters them, confuses their language. The reset didn't take. It cleansed the corruption, but it didn't change the condition. The corruption was external. The Beni Elohim and Nephilim, the wickedness they spread. The flood washed all of that away, but human nature itself was still broken. And the moment the pressure was off, it broke again. That's what every tradition we've looked at runs into. The Aztecs knew that's why they had 5 suns. Reset, corrupt, reset, corrupt. They watched it happen 4 times before their current age. They expected it would happen again. The Yoruba know that's why the rituals never stop. That's why the divination never stops. That's why the sacrifices never stop. The reconnection has to be performed continuously because the disconnection keeps reasserting itself. The Mesopotamians barely had a hopeful afterlife. The texts describe it as a shadowy, weak existence, the dust of the underworld, where even kings become powerless ghosts. Humanity, in their theology, could not access eternal life. That was God's property alone, the property of the gods alone. The Greeks had Elysium for the heroes, but Elysium was for a tiny minority. Most of the dead went to the grey indifference of Hades. And even the gods were not eternal in the way you might think. Greek mythology is a long story of one divine order being overthrown by another. There's no permanence even at the top. Every tradition stops at the same wall. The corruption keeps coming back. The reset keeps being needed. The cycle keeps turning. And no one, no Orisha, no Apkallu, no Titan, no Olympian, no Aztec god can break it. Because the problem isn't environmental, you see. The problem isn't that the Bene Elohim taught humans the wrong things. The problem is far deeper than that. The problem is that something inside the human line itself was broken in the garden before any divine boundary crossings, before any of the cultural memories diverged. Think about what the flood actually accomplished. It removed the Nephilim. It removed the corrupted offspring. It removed the men of renown who had become objects of worship. It scrubbed the earth of the product of the transgression, but it didn't remove the capacity for the same transgression. Noah stepped off the ark, and the human heart was exactly where it was when he got on. The Beni Elohim were imprisoned, but their influence had already done its work. The knowledge was already loose. The patterns were already established, and without the Nephilim physically present, humanity found other ways to reach for the same forbidden things. Babel will build a tower to the heavens. We'll make our name for ourselves. We'll reach the divine realm by our own effort. Same impulse, no Beni Elohim required this time. The corruption had gone internal, and this is what no tradition would have looked at that we've looked at today has a solution for. Not one. The Yoruba solution is beautiful in its way. You reconnect through the Orishas, through divination, through ritual. You reach towards Oludumare through intermediaries he provided. But you have to keep reaching every day, every ceremony, every sacrifice, because the disconnection keeps reasserting itself, because the problem that caused the disconnection is still there inside the human heart. No amount of ritual removes it. It manages it, doesn't end it. The Aztec solution is honest about the cycle in a way that's almost painful to read. The 4th sun ended in a flood. Cox survived. The world was repopulated. And then the 5th sun, a new age, a new humanity with the same corrupt nature, requiring blood sacrifice just to keep the sun moving, requiring constant feeding of divine just to forestall the next inevitable collapse. They knew it was coming, they just didn't know how to stop it. The Mesopotamian solution isn't really a solution at all. It's a resignation. Afterlife is a dusty, shadowy realm. Even kings become powerless ghosts. The best you can hope for is a good life while you're in it. Eternal life belongs to the gods. Humanity exists to serve them and then to dissolve into the underworld. That's not a solution, that's a surrender. And here's the thing, every tradition we've looked at identified the problem clearly enough. Divine boundary crossing, knowledge given, corruption followed, judgment came, reset attempted, diagnosis was sound. But the prescription was always the same: try again, cleanse again, reconnect again, repeat. Which means, and I want you to feel the weight of this, that every single person who ever performed a ritual to the Orishas, every person who ever performed, who ever built a tower to reach the heavens, every person who ever offered blood sacrifice to keep the fifth sun moving was treating a symptom. Because the disease was in the heart, and no flood can wash that out. You can't fix the human heart by removing what's around it. You have to fix the heart itself. And there's only one way to fix the heart itself. You have to enter it from the inside. So watch this. Genesis 3, the garden, the promise, the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. Problem named. Solution promised. Before any flood, before any reset, before any cultural memories diverged, the answer was already there. Genesis 6, the Bene Elohim crossed, corruption, flood, the line is preserved. The promise is kept alive. The flood wasn't the answer, it was a surgical intervention to keep the seed line viable. Genesis 12, God calls Abraham, in your seed the nations of the earth will be blessed. Watch the seed narrowing from the whole human race to one man's bloodline. All nations, not just one tribe, all of them. Genesis 49, Jacob blesses Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes, narrowing again from Abraham's whole line to one of his great grandsons, one tribe out of the 12, unto Shiloh, unto the one to whom it belongs. 2 Samuel 7, God promises David, I will raise up your seed after you, and I will establish his throne forever. Narrower still, from the tribe of Judah to the royal line inside that tribe, forever. Not an age, not until the next reset, forever. Isaiah 7, behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel, God with us. Narrower still, from the royal line to a specific birth, a virgin birth, and the child's name is God with us. Just sit with that for a second. The Old Testament, the book that critics say doesn't teach the deity of Christ, says the coming child will be God with us. Isaiah 9, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Spoken of a child who will be born. Let that settle before we move on. Isaiah called him Mighty God 7 centuries before Bethlehem. The answer was being written down. Micah 5, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient of days. A specific town with a specific story from of old, from ancient days. Eternal, the prophet naming the postcode. Daniel 7, the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven. He is given dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all peoples and nations should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. Not a cycle, an everlasting dominion. Not a reset, a resolution. Then 400 years of silence, and then Bethlehem. A young girl, no older than 14 or 15. A carpenter named Joseph. A stable and a manger. A baby. And an announcement. Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Who, and not who manages it, not who cleanses it for a while, and who takes it away. This is not another flood. This is not another reset. This is not another divine being descending to teach humanity new tricks before the next inevitable corruption. This is God becoming human. And here's what I want you to feel. Every descent before him made humanity worse. One descent made humanity new. Hold that, let it land. Every descent before him made humanity worse. One descent made humanity new. The very thing that no Orisha, no Apkallu, no Titan, no Aztec deity ever did, not because they couldn't reach down, they reached down all the time. That's the whole pattern we've been tracing. They reached down to take, to teach, to seize, to inseminate, to corrupt. But none of them came down to be one of us. None of them came down to die for us. None of them came down to take the corruption into themselves and absorb it and end it. That's what Bethlehem is. That's what the Calvary is, and that's what the empty tomb is. It's God doing what no flood could do, what no ritual could do, what no reincarnation cycle could do, what no sacrifice to the Orishas could do. He didn't cleanse the corruption from the outside. He entered the corrupt line and redeemed it from the inside. He took on flesh. The flesh came from Adam. Flesh traced through Noah, flesh traced through Abraham, flesh that traced through David, flesh that came through the woman whose seed God had promised in the garden. And he carried that flesh through death and out the other side. And when he came out the other side, he had broken something that Apkallu couldn't break. He'd broken something Olokun couldn't break with all her flooding. He had broken something that Zeus couldn't break with all his thunderbolts. He had broken death, because the corruption that the Bene Elohim spread, the corruption that every culture was trying to manage with their resets and with their cycles and with their sacrifices, that corruption ends in death. That's what it does. Death is what corruption produces. Genesis 6 ends with a flood because the corruption ends in death. But on the third day, the seed of the woman walked out of the tomb. And now I want to tell you the other thing that no tradition ever imagined. Every tradition we've looked at had a hierarchy. Gods up there, humans down here. Maybe demigods in between. Compromised hybrids, never quite belonging to either realm. At best, humanity could hope for intermediary status, favor from the gods, a good afterlife, reconnection through ritual, but never, and I mean never, kinship. You weren't family. You were a subject, a worshipper, a servant, a source of sacrifice to keep the gods fed, a working in project of the divine. That's what every tradition offers, up to and including the Orishas. Through divination and ritual, you reach towards Olodumare, but you reach as a creature, not as a child. But the incarnation does something none of these traditions even had language for. Romans 8. You did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear, but you received the spirit of sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. Galatians 4. God sent his Son that we might receive adoption as sons. Ephesians 1. He predestined us for adoptions to sonship through Jesus Christ. The man from above didn't just come down to fix the line, he came down to restructure the line by adoption into the family of God. That is unheard of. No Orisha ever adopted a human. No Apkallu ever called a mortal brother. No Greek god ever invited humanity into the family council on Olympus. Zeus had demigod children forced into existence through transgression, but he never adopted the human race. But the seed of the woman, the one promised in the garden, the one who's coming narrowed from the whole human race to one bloodline, to one tribe, to one house, to one virgin, to one town, that seed came through and opened the family, not as a cycle, but as adoption, not as management, as kingship, not as intermediaries to reach across the gap, as the gap closed and the family reopened from the inside. That's the answer the Yoruba couldn't reach with reincarnation. That's the answer the Aztecs couldn't reach with the five sons, and that's the answer the Mesopotamians couldn't reach with their ritual technology. That's the answer the Greeks couldn't reach with their cosmic power transfers. A complete solution, once for all, unrepeatable. Because the seed promised in Genesis 3 had finally crushed the head of the serpent and the head of every cycle the serpent's corruption ever produced, he didn't just end the cycle, he made us family. So let's come back to where we started. A pop star wears a trident on stage. Someone posts a photo with peacock feathers and honey. Someone says, "This is my heritage. This is what was taken from us. This is what I'm reclaiming." And I want to say to that person gently, because I mean this gently, yes, your heritage is real. Your ancestors did know something. They preserved a memory that goes back to the very edge of human history. Take that seriously. If you're going to honor what your ancestors remembered, honor what they were trying to point to. That they were pointing to a real event. They were pointing to a real problem. They were pointing to a real intervention. They were pointing to a real cleansing. They didn't have the resolution because they couldn't have, because the resolution didn't come through their tradition. The resolution came through a Hebrew girl in a stable in Bethlehem. And here's what's strange: that resolution wasn't given to one tribe to keep. The promise from the garden was to all nations, was that all nations would be blessed by the seed of this woman. Every culture that ever remembered the flood was being told in their own language, in their own broken language, that something was coming that would resolve what the flood couldn't. And that something has come. That something is for the Yoruba and for the Greek and for the Mesopotamian and for the Mesoamerican and for the Englishman and for the American and for everyone, because it was promised to the seed of the woman, and every human being on the earth is descended from her. So when someone tells you this is a white man's religion, this is what they brought to us, this isn't ours, I want to gently correct that. The gospel didn't start in Europe, it started in a Middle Eastern garden. It was promised before any tribe existed. It was fulfilled in a corner of the Roman Empire among a small Semitic people. And it was always meant for everyone, including the people whose ancestors were remembering it from the other side. Through the long lens of Olokun and Umoja and the Orishas, your heritage was reaching for him. He arrived. He is still here, and he didn't come to make you a worshipper of a distant supreme being through intermediaries you can't see. He didn't come to give you a better ritual than Olokun or Oshun. He didn't come to make you a better servant of the divine. He came to make you family. And that's the word none of the other traditions had. That's the thing no Orisha ever offered. That's the answer that breaks every cycle, closes every gap, because family doesn't get reset. The question every other tradition couldn't answer, how do we close the gap, has been answered. The question he asks back is the only one that matters. Who do you say I am? Not who do your ancestors say, not who does your culture say, not who does a trend say, who do you say he is? Because the cycle ends when you answer that question. The reset stops when you answer that question. The endless reconnection that Orishas couldn't permanently closes when you answer that question. Before I go, if any of this landed for you, if any of this shifted something, if you're seeing the pattern differently, or if you're seeing your heritage differently, or seeing Christ differently, I genuinely want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what moved. Tell me if you're thinking, tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you would push back on. That conversation matters a lot to me. And if you want more of this deep investigation, these deep investigations into scripture and patterns that nobody's connecting, questions that most people won't touch, subscribe. It lets the algorithm know that people want this kind of content. Like the video if it was worth your time. It costs you nothing, and it helps this work reach more people who need it. Now back to where we were. Every descent before him made humanity worse. One descent made humanity new. He's the seed, he's the answer. He's the one every tradition was searching for. He's standing there. What are you going to do with him?